Greetings, Disney adults, Disney fans of all ages, and welcome. My first trip to Disney World, many years ago, back in the mid-70s, I was 9 years old. My family had a truck camper, so we put the truck camper on the back of our truck. I sat up in the front seat with my dad, my mom and my sister. They stayed up in the little bed above the cab. We had a walkie-talkie so we could talk to each other. That was a great trip. Believe that would be frowned upon nowadays for someone to ride in the camper during a trip. But hey, we loved it, and we stayed at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort. We loved it so much that our next trip, just a couple of years later, we stayed at Fort Wilderness again, only this time my mother said, I want to stay in one of these cabins. And from then on, that kind of became our go-to. We would stay at the cabins at Fort Wilderness Resort. I mean, we did break it up one time by staying at the Contemporary, but generally my family liked Fort Wilderness. Fast forward, I married my lovely wife in 1994. When we were discussing our marriage and, more to the point, our honeymoon, she said that she wanted to go to Disney World for our honeymoon. Right there made me think I have found the right woman for me. She had never been to Disney, but she said, I want to take advantage of the fact that my husband's been many times. In fact, he used to work there. And so we went to Disney World. Now, when I asked her about hotel possibilities, I first thought of the Grand Floridian. I said the Grand Floridian, very elegant, seemed to me to be a very honeymoon type of place to stay. But my wife came back and said, that sounds a little too posh and upscale for me. She said it just doesn't really fit who I am. So we instead stayed at the newly opened Wilderness Lodge. And that became my favorite resort. Still my favorite resort, even though I haven't been able to stay there in a very long time. Now, we stayed at the Wilderness Lodge a few other times, and in the years since, I have been fortunate to stay at a number of Walt Disney hotels. I've stayed at the Polynesian. We stayed at the Caribbean Beach. I don't know how you pronounce it. Caribbean, you choose. We stayed at All-Star Music. We stayed at All-Star Sports. We had a wonderful trip where we stayed at Port Orleans at the French Quarter. And then, of course, our go-to resort now is always Pop Century. We love Pop Century mainly because we love the Skyliner. We love the convenience of the Skyliner. I say all this to let you know there are a lot of hotels and a lot of resorts at Disney World. So here's our question for the day. What would Walt think of all of these hotels, all of these resorts at Disney World? To answer that question, we of course first have to go back in time. We have to have a little history lesson. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's go back in time.
Well, thank you very much, Art. And here on the Lake of Tomorrowland, we have boats made out of fiberglass, and they're as strong and safe as anything afloat. And I have two customers right here, Bonita Granville and Jack Rather.
Hi, Ronnie.
Hi, Ronnie. How are you?
Just fine. And say, I've seen you since we left the bus early this morning here.
Well, we had a nice ride out, and we've had a big day here.
Oh, boy. Can you see it all in one day?
Oh, it's impossible. It's a fabulous place.
And that gets me around to the other point. You're sort of interested in a hotel arrangement around here, aren't you?
Yes, we're building the Disneyland Hotel, which is right at the exit to Disneyland Park.
And you and Nancy have got to bring the kids and come out and stay with us.
When are you going to open?
We're opening part of it in September and the rest of it in January, Ronnie.
We shall be there in September.
Fine.
The Disneyland Hotel. You see, when Walt Disney planned his building of Disneyland back in the early 50s, the original plan was always to have a hotel tied to Disneyland. Unfortunately for the Disney company, the cost for Disneyland wound up being a lot more than they expected. and they ran out of money and could not afford to build a hotel. So Walt reached out to a number of different investors and a number of different companies, including several chain hotels, and asked if anyone would be interested in building a hotel for Disneyland. Pretty much universally, he was told no. And remember, we've discussed this on this channel before. Back in the 50s, amusement parks were seen as very sketchy. They were certainly not something that anybody wanted to invest in. And so hotels were understandably very hesitant about putting a hotel and tying it to an amusement park. Amusement parks typically were seen as very unclean. They were poorly maintained. And they tended to have people who you may not want to have your kids associate with. And so Walt did not find any interest in building a hotel for his park. He finally reached out to a man named Jack Rather. Jack Rather was an oil tycoon who he had already approached about building and managing a hotel and had already been turned down. But Walt Disney approached him a second time, and finally he convinced Jack Rather to go ahead and build a hotel. Now Jack, very intelligently I might add, decided to do a multi-phase approach to his hotel. Phase 1 would just give us a basic hotel building, and then he would see how successful things were and then add to the hotel after that. Well, by the time the first phase of the hotel opened, several months after Disneyland had opened, Jack Rather realized that this was going to be a great investment. Disneyland had surpassed all expectations and was very successful. So Jack Rather jumped in with both feet and created the Disneyland Hotel, which in and of itself was a fantastic experience. Now, I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about the Disneyland Hotel. I will, however, link you to a great video from Yesterworld in the comments below, or in the description below, that talks about the Disneyland Hotel at great length. And I encourage you to watch that. It's very, very good. Now, when Disney World was being planned, in its early phases of development and planning, there would be the Magic Kingdom, and then a couple of hotels to serve the Magic Kingdom. Those hotels would eventually become the Contemporary and the Polynesian Resort. There was also a campground, Fort Wilderness Campground. It opened about a month after the park did, in 1971. And then there was also, of course, the Golf Resort, which opened about a year after the park opened. There were also initial plans for a Phase 2 development, which would include several more hotels, including an Asian hotel, which was actually begun by like pouring foundations and sort of clearing of land. There was also plans for a Moroccan-themed hotel. But the energy crisis and the recession of the 70s unfortunately put a stop to all of those plans. Now in the 80s, when Michael Eisner came in, he wanted to add more resorts to the Disney World Resort. Now he asked them to scrap the idea of an Asian resort, and instead they turned what little work had been done into the Grand Floridian. Now, kind of in response, I guess, to saying, hey, we're going to have a super high dollar resort, they also said, let's build a resort that's a little cheaper, a moderately priced resort. That became the Caribbean Beach. Michael Eisner also had several other resorts that were opened up under his tenure. So now we fast forward to today. The Walt Disney website lists over 25 hotels. And if you also add Disney resorts that are on Disney property, resorts that are on Disney property not owned by Disney, you wind up with over 30 hotels on Disney property. That amounts to over 36,000 rooms. 36,000 rooms. That's a lot of rooms. I think somewhere I read that the Disney company could basically accommodate 160,000 people if every room was used. So here's the question. What would Walt think? What would Walt think of all of these hotels on his property? Now, when I undertook this particular video, and as I've been going through and doing research to ask and answer this question, my initial thought was, there's too many hotels. Walt would not like all of these hotels because it leads to overcrowding of the parks. And I have had times when I've gone to the parks where I felt like there was just too many people. And I felt like Walt would not like that part of it. But as I got into the research for this, and as I read some other articles from other people, I came to realize that the number of people in the parks is only slightly related to how much hotel space there is. After all, someone could come to the parks who's just staying at an off-site resort or hotel. Disney or Florida residents, of course, Orlando residents, they can come to Disney World whenever they want. And they're certainly not staying at hotels for the most part, not Disney hotels. So ultimately, the number of people in the parks has to do with how many people the Disney company is allowing to visit the parks, which is a different video for a different day, and that really has nothing to do with Disney hotels. So now we're going to ask the question, what would Walt think? I believe Walt would say, we need hotels, but I believe Walt would also say, the original plans, we had 4 hotels for one park. Now there are 4 ticketed parks, not counting the water parks. So that should be, maybe 16 hotels? I believe Walt would say, I don't know if we need 30 hotels on Disney property. And I believe Walt would say, is there a better way to utilize our time, our resources, and our energy, rather than just building more and more hotels? So that's what I kind of think. Tell me what you think. Hey guys, leave me a comment below. Do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to my channel. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you think I'm way off base or if you think I'm right. I'd like to hear from you. Look forward to it, and I look forward to seeing you at Disney World. Thanks, guys.